It all comes together in the edit, so they say, but you still need to give yourself the best fighting chance by doing your absolute best to capture the right material when you're filming everything, to then go on and edit with. The best way to think of it is like getting the best ingredients you possibly can before you start cooking a meal. By 2018, I had now been invested in this project for approximately 3 years. I was so deeply immersed in it that my daily routine had become rigid, and I decided to maintain working on construction sites as my sole financial income while at the same time editing the film outside of that. Now, up to that point, most of the films I had made were much shorter pieces. This was going to be a 90-minute film, and there was 2 years of footage for me to now carefully go through. Initially, I did try to edit the film while I was shooting it, but I abandoned that idea as trying to edit the film while working on a construction site, while filming it, and while organising the filming of it all proved to just be too much for me to handle all at once. But now that the filming was over, I was fully focused on the edit alone. And I started and then deleted everything I had started in that edit many times in the early stages. And I was kind of scratching my head of how to go about it. Of course, editing is a very different mindset, a different beast, and completely different discipline to filming. So now I had to suddenly change gears and to essentially switch brains. I had the script printed out on my desk in front of me to make sure that I was keeping to the order of things, but that order of things within the script would drastically change as I cut the film up. My plan of attack was to break the film down into chunks and treat every chunk like it was its own short film that needed to be edited. Otherwise, if I sat there and looked at the entire 90 minutes to complete as a whole, it just all felt too overwhelming. I tried to be as strict as possible, and this being a very personal project, obviously it would be very easy to want to keep absolutely everything in, because now suddenly everything seems crucial, and of course the film won't be the same without that one specific bit. Back when I was writing the script, I knew I did not want the film to have a runtime that went beyond 90 minutes, so this 100% meant that I had to remove a lot of footage from the final cut. Now that I was able to edit lots of scenes together and eventually in the chronological order of the script, it was exciting. It all felt like it was starting to take shape in a much more serious way. And it was also a chance now to take in more just how well we had organised all the filming of it all. Like this project as a whole, editing a film is like putting together another massive puzzle. At first, the pieces are absolutely everywhere, but eventually, after slotting some of the right pieces into the right places, you start to see the picture very slowly unfold, and that's a great place to be at. But for that to happen, a lot of other things needed to happen first. It's not as simple as just finding the best takes that make up the scenes and then throwing them next to each other in the order of what the script says, because for the film to work on screen away from just being on paper, you also need to find the right rhythm, the correct tempo, atmosphere, and to create a connection with the viewer, which could mean changing a lot of things along the way to get to that. Now, these things ain't always apparent when at the writing stages or the filming stages, and as always, some parts what you imagine will work out well in both of those stages very suddenly don't when you are cutting it together and you're watching it back on screen, sometimes drastically so. Suddenly you also realise the script is becoming more of a helpful guide than anything that is actually set in stone. The questions are endless. For example, you could be asking yourself, are we spending too long in one emotion? Should that emotion really follow this emotion, as it doesn't feel right and is a little too jarring? Was this bit cut too harsh or not harsh enough? Maybe it would work better if I focused on the reaction shot here rather than on the person who's doing the talking, but do I even have the reaction shot? Should I let this take go on for a bit longer here than I first thought? Is the tempo of the film too fast between this period and that period? Should we slow it down a bit? Are we getting to the point quick enough or too quickly? If we take what he says here and then we combine it with what he says there, then suddenly it has a better meaning and comes across better. Do we need music here? Does this part really work here? As I say, the questions feel endless, and a lot of it does come down to gut feeling, being honest with yourself, getting second and third opinions from others, being strict with what works best, having experience of editing other things, and also what I always kept asking myself throughout every stage of production: would I really watch this? To help me further, I also try to have references to keep checking in with. For example, one of my favourite films is Nil by Mouth, written and directed by Gary Oldman. I think this film is brilliant on so many levels, and it's also a film that very much inspired some of how I would possibly like to see my film. While editing, if I wasn't sure about something I was doing, if I was chewing over a decision to make, whether it was something creative I was trying to force in or anything else, and I was struggling to make up my mind on it, I would sometimes actually stop and ask myself, would they have really have done this in Nil by Mouth? Highly unlikely with some of the more abstract things I was trying to squeeze in at times very early on, and ultimately, rightly or wrongly, by asking myself that question, it helped me make some decisions on what to do. I also found this point of reference to be a helpful tool if you don't have anybody else around you to discuss things with at the time, like I had when I was filming, because now in the edit I was alone. A hell of a lot of stuff was removed from the film in the edit. There were scenes and ideas we shot that touched on a lot more social commentary, complex conversations between characters, even subliminal messaging ideas, also religious aspects, and as mentioned, also very abstract visuals that all took a long time to film, but for one reason or another, it all just didn't work now in the edit, or it no longer fit the mood when watching it back. An aspect of film editing that I had to very much learn about over the years, especially when I first started making films, was to know when not to cram in too many very opposing ideas. Otherwise, it's easy for a film to start straying away from having any kind of cohesive story. Obviously, depending on what your goal is, attempting to force in too much variation, it can all suddenly just seem like a collage of very random ideas all thrown in together. Another rule I strictly followed when deciding what footage to lose was to ask myself, is this part here vital to the story of the film? If we need to trim the film down and we lost this bit here, can we still move forward with the telling of the story and not even notice that it was missing? If the answer was yes, no matter how much it pained me, I removed it to get the runtime down. It was all a constant balancing act in so many ways, because one take might work well when all the elements fell into place when watching it back, but then on the second or third take, whilst all those same elements didn't fall into place, something else unexpected had happened, and that something else was gold. So which take would I use? I really did try to be as ruthless as possible with what I removed and to not be too self-indulgent with what I left in, and maybe I was a little too ruthless in the end looking back, or not enough depending on who you ask. During the edit, as with the filming and the writing stages, I was also keen to try out some experimental things once again. For example, to try interacting with the audience with how it was cut, and to not just rely on what was being said by the characters' dialogue alone. I found it interesting to see if it was possible to get reactions and emotions from the viewer by interacting with them in this way. The main character of the film lives a very conflicted and lonely existence. One of the ways that I wanted to try and heighten this in the edit was to leave certain takes, particularly when he was experiencing this isolation, leave them running for an overly exaggerated period of time, and to push beyond when a viewer might instinctively think to themselves, shouldn't we probably cut here? Instead, I allowed the take to continue on until it reached the point where it might have seemed a little awkward or uncomfortable to watch, even if not much was happening on screen. In very early drafts of the edit, I purposely showed the first 25 minutes to people who I knew have very short attention spans and who are also quite hyperactive people, so to speak. And from the off, one of the reactions I got from someone was them jumping up out of their seat and declaring, "I'm sorry, but I just cannot watch this." Obviously, I asked, why not? "It looks great, but it's just making me feel way too uncomfortable," was the response that I got. Now, personally, at the time, I was happy to get such an extreme reaction, even if it meant losing an audience member. No doubt, this experimental way of going about it was very risky again, because what I was also doing was alerting the viewer's mind to the fact that it was watching a film, and by doing so, slightly taking them out of the experience for a brief moment. Or perhaps even boring some other viewers, of course, who weren't into this approach at all, which is obviously counterproductive to the whole point of watching a film. So I was trying to find the right balance, but I was aware it would be quite a divisive way of editing, depending on who was watching, and I knew it wouldn't be everyone's cup of tea. I think this was obviously more of me feeling that if I have just one shot at making a feature film on my own terms, then why not try some things out? Another similar example of this type of editing in a film that I only discovered after I had made Electrician, thankfully, as I may have gone even further with the idea of extended takes, is a great film called Cure by Kiyoshi Kurosawa. When I wasn't working on a construction site and I was able to spend time on the edit, my day would usually consist of me jumping on the computer very early in the morning, sometimes at around 7 AM, and then not stopping until quite late at night, sometimes at around midnight or even later, with breaks in between, of course. Doing this almost every day for 2 to 3 week bursts at a time until the next construction site began for me to start work on again. This routine carried on like this for 1 year. And after that year, I still hadn't finished the editing. By now, a friend of mine who would phone me up for chats would frequently start our conversation by saying, "Let me guess, you're editing." My dad soon followed suit by asking me, "Are you remaking Ben-Hur or something? Why is this film taking so long?" These comments coming about because my answer to them every time they phoned me up without fail when they asked me what I was doing was always, "I'm editing." From cutting the film together over the course of that year, I was now also able to take a closer look and discover some things about myself as a filmmaker as well. For example, it was interesting to notice when looking back at the footage much more thoroughly on the computer monitor, how over the course of 2 years of filming, the difference there was in how I shot things, by comparing how I shot things at the end of filming to when I had first started. Yeah, I felt like I was a much more better cinematographer, so to speak, towards the end of that period, with obvious things such as the composition, framing of shots, and some technical aspects with the camera, but it was also interesting to note other differences, such as seeing my own style that I had developed. Also, a lot of the time when editing, I could hear myself back from when we had filmed the footage, and I could listen to the directions I was giving out to people. Again, I was able to compare how I had directed over a 2-year period had changed, and how I was learning to sum things up quicker with what I wanted, make better decisions quicker, explain things better, and learning when to just shut up as well sometimes. Looking back, were these some of the benefits that resulted from having such a long filming period? Eventually, the same would be said with the editing, and noticing how over time my approach was changing with that, maybe even more so with the editing. Reason being is because when I first set out on this road with making Electrician, the feature film version, I was 29, and by the time I wrapped up all the editing, I was just about to turn 35. Of course, during that time, as we inevitably get older, we also mature, especially in our personalities, outlook, and it's fair to say that we can become quite different people overall. And I noticed that this was affecting how I was editing things. Obviously, I tried my best to set up and organize the edit as neatly as possible with how I set up my folders, how I named them, and how I inserted everything into Premiere Pro. Plus, I had hard drives and backups everywhere. There was a lot to stay on top of with years of footage, but like everyone who edits, I also had my nightmares from time to time with missing files, missing links, corrupt files, footage not found messages, errors, constant software updates, spinning wheels, false quits, crashes, and all kinds of other computer gremlins involved with such a large spider web of files. And yeah, there were plenty of times when the computer crashed before I had saved. I set targets for myself to aim towards with the editing, and I gave myself mini deadlines of things. If I hadn't figured something out in a certain time, then I just moved on with another section instead, and I would come back to the troublesome bit later. During that first year of editing the film, quite some time into it, I was eventually at a stage where I could sit down and watch what I considered to be my first full rough draft of the complete film. When I did, I was distraught. I absolutely hated it. To say that I was left feeling deflated was an understatement. There were all sorts of problems with it. Plus, I probably watched it back way too closely after completing that first draft. I was so disappointed that I switched off the computer and I didn't turn it back on again to edit for well over a month. But eventually I stopped being so ridiculously overdramatic and I just went back at it. I just kept reminding myself that this was only a first rough draft, and once again, how this huge edit was like another big puzzle. I had to keep putting the pieces into place, which sometimes meant putting pieces into the wrong places and having to remove them again until eventually the correct picture started to unfold. I thought of those people who create those ice sculptures out of huge blocks of ice. I'm pretty sure there's times halfway through their creation where the ice that they're chipping away at just looks like a complete and utter mess before it suddenly starts to reveal itself of what the creation is meant to be. So afterwards, I made a point of having extended breaks first before sitting down again to watch any more full rough drafts of the completed film. No doubt, I'm sure that other film editors who are listening to this, and even people involved with very solitary tasks in general, can relate when I say that I started to find myself in quite a strange place after one entire year of editing alone in my flat. There were lots of times during the filming stage where I had to shoot the same things over and over again, such as take after take of a scene, but that felt like nothing compared to the amount of times I then watched it all back over and over again in the edit over the course of that 1 year. It was easy to let it all become a bit of a blur, to start to lose perspective, for it to become very monotonous and also lose meaning sometimes as well. The little nuances and reasons why one take worked slightly better than another take, when they both looked exactly similar at first glance, were vital differences in my opinion, and these little differences started to become my fixations. As I've already said, editing alone meant that I had nobody else to bounce off now, not like when I was shooting things with others around me. For as much as I tried to replace that void of people with other points of reference, such as other films like Nil by Math, but not having anyone else there with me to quickly chat with, try things with, go back and forth with, or get second opinions off of in the moment was tough. Also, depending on the day, how I woke up and the mood I was in, that had big deciding factors on the debates I was having with myself on what worked in the edit or not, and fortunately I was aware of this just about. I tried to take a step back to clarify my decisions and avoid making rash choices simply because I was in a bad mood that day, or for example, starting to delete things in the edit because I was in that bad mood. I also wanted to avoid acting out of frustration or boredom, or swinging in the opposite directions and suddenly viewing more somber sections of the film differently just because I happened to be in a good mood that day and I thought things should be more lighthearted. I was aware of all this, and it even influenced which sections of the film I chose to edit on certain days depending on how I was feeling. It was difficult to remain constantly mindful of these things throughout the process, and at times it does become frustrating and exhausting. During the periods when I had to work on a construction site, I would take a complete break from the edit. And to be honest, it was welcome. Plus, like when I was writing the script, I found this break helped the process as it gave me time to clear my mind. When I did go back to it, I was able to look at things again with fresher eyes. Now, being comfortable alone or having periods of being alone is one thing, and I genuinely believe it can be effective and very productive for lots of different reasons, and a lot more people should try it. But by this point now, I had drastically increased that solitary way of living in self-imposed social isolation. I was aware that I was spending a hell of a lot of time by myself by this point, but it was not fully registering for me yet what the true extent of it really was and what that meant for me yet in some negative ways. I was totally blinkered because getting the film made had totally consumed my mind and my entire existence for nearly 4 years at this point. As time went on with the edit, I started to show full rough drafts of it to other people and to get their input. But I always made a point of showing it to people that I knew 100% would give me their brutally honest feedback no matter what, and also to people that were quite different in their personalities, to try and get all kinds of different perspectives, all of which I took on board, and I made a lot of changes to the film from that feedback that I was given. In the end, after 1 year, the final cut I settled on to take into the deeper stages of post-production was draft number 33. So it was my 33rd attempt at editing a 90-minute film.